Today, ladies and gentlemen, you're in for something absolutely amazing. Richard Kane from VeriJet is truly revolutionizing the air travel. And really, this is not an exaggeration. After you've listened to this episode of the Business of Meeting podcast with Richard Kane, I think you will only agree with me. Richard is changing the way we're going to travel. Enjoy listening to this episode. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meetings podcast. I'm Eric Rosenberg, and today I have the great pleasure, I don't know how to qualify that. It's such an honor and excitement to speak with my friend Richard Kane. Richard is really an amazing individual. He's revolutionizing air travel. We're going to talk about that in a minute. He's the CEO as well of a coastal technology group, which is the Inc. 500 companies. He's the CEO of VeriJet. We're going to talk about. He's involved in the X Prize. He's doing so many things. And every time I talk to him or listen to him, I'm wondering where is his twin brother, because he's doing too many things for one man. Richard, thank you so much for taking the time.
Hi, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're just one of the I would say a genius, a businessman, a father, a friend. You're everything at once. But how did that happen? Were you already, we look at movies of people studying and they're like this kid in Belgium that's just graduated of a master in physics at 11 years old. Were you that type of child, or it just happened after studying?
My first commercial computer work was at age 14 or 15, and I was writing AI programs by 17 and featured in the New York Times for inventing new types of security and copy protection about 17 or 18. And the principal of my high school quit his job to market software that I wrote. And I was the school's first computer teacher. So just right time, right place. And I have a affinity for math, computer science, geeky stuff. So.
That's absolutely amazing. And thanks to the Strategic Forum in Miami, we get to know each other, and I was able to learn about all the things you've done. So what was your journey, before we speak about what you're doing to really revolutionize air travel? What was your journey into invention, your journey into business? You say you were already doing artificial intelligence work when you were 17. What happened after high school, and what was your journey?
So let's just establish a few things. One, I'm old, okay? And so I was writing those AI programs on pet Commodores and things you'd barely recognize as computers today, trying to get any performance out of 8-bit processors with little bits of memory required very tight code. And some of the best developers I know came from that environment, because you had to really work at it to get the computers to do anything at all. So I mentioned that I wrote some software in high school, that I was profiled in the New York Times. What I haven't mentioned yet is the state university systems in Florida bought that software. And I was doing tech support for one of the deans. And he goes, "Son, how old are you?" And I gave him an honest answer, because we have this program where the team that created the IBM PC, they'll be your professors. And they're backed up by the team from Motorola down the road with the pagers and the flip phones doing the first VLSI chips. And this is the best place in the US for a computer education right now. And I agreed. I came down to Florida, I visited with the team, and I was one of 100 students that they recruited from around the planet to join this faculty scholars program. The school was close to the beach. It was an upper division university only. We're talking about Florida Atlantic University. I was able to jump 2 years of college, and I had the most amazing professors. They literally created the PC. So I learned all that there was to know about PCs. I could breadboard them, build them, create projects with them. I skipped through the master's level stuff. And then I wanted to learn about the bigger computers. And I never saw the internet coming, didn't see the commercial utility of the smaller computers. I wanted to learn about computers that filled buildings and ran NASDAQ or the telephone companies, specifically these things called tandem computers. They were fault tolerant, they were in smoked black glass cases, they were cool. And the only people that had them in Florida were the phone companies. So I went to work for a small phone company. And in that journey, they hired me to be a math optimization person for the phone networks. And after a few months, some of my code was saving them millions of dollars on a monthly basis. And they asked what I needed to continue that job. And the answer was some dedicated computer time and a small staff. A few of those people are still with me 30 years later. That's kind of been the journey that we're on. But that involved routing phone calls, which segued into routing airplanes, which then VeriJet is built on top of. So it's a 3-decade journey, and it has to do with this math called the traveling salesman problem and how to route things more efficiently. You mentioned an Inc. 500 CEO, that's Coastal. I was routing 100 million phone calls an hour as the phones were ringing, 14 billion calls a month on a supercomputer cluster, 68% EBITDA on audited financials. It put me on the Inc. 500 list, and I did that for a decade. If we have time later, I'll tell you about the only 2 interesting things that happened in that decade. But my board included Peter Diamandis, founder of XPRIZE, a pilot. I'm a pilot. We thought routing airplanes would have more environmental impact, social impact, be more interesting than routing phone calls. And we had already driven the cost of long distance to near zero. So that mission was accomplished, changed one industry. Let's go for private aviation, the second industry. A decade of that, where I was tackling, flying large airplanes empty and being radically inefficient, just being poor custodians of the environment and poor fiduciary people. I fixed that. I changed that industry, but we were still flying the wrong machines for the mission. A heavy metal jet on short hops, using lots of gas, making lots of noise, spewing out lots of carbon. And there's a better machine for that too. So my last decade was the software fix, AI-based, how to make this industry run more smoothly. VeriJet is the right tool for the job, the right airplane for short haul. And we'll talk more about that in a bit as well.
Fascinating. Well, in few minutes that you explain, I realized that you're one of those overnight success that took 30 years to get there, right?
VeriJet dates back to a NASA program 25 years ago. I was at Danville, Virginia for the inaugural conference of the Small Aircraft Transportation System. So very briefly, we went from horses to cars and got 75 miles an hour, and from cars to propeller planes, 200 miles an hour, and propeller planes to jets, 500 miles an hour. And then airline deregulation, TSA, hub and spoke, 9/11. We're back down to point, 75 miles an hour. And God help you if you connect, it's even worse. So that program, SATS, and my company, VeriJet, are about tripling the speed of short haul travel, bringing it back up to 300 miles an hour. Every time you triple the speed of a technology, even double it, you just change out the underlying technology. It's exactly 8 years from the first car to the last horse in Manhattan. That's what we're talking about, changing the way people travel.
And so there's so many things that I want to ask you, Richard, from what you say. First of all, you're talking about the traveling salesman math. So I always say, if I understand something, everybody will understand. So can you explain me, and maybe some people that are listening don't know what exactly is the traveling salesman math problem?
So this has to do with optimizing the path of the traveling salesman to cover the most points with the least amount of travel time, the least amount of cost, as quickly and efficiently as possible. And it's not something you solve like a calculation or a formula. It's something you attack with brute force. So by the time you get to a fleet of about 70 aircraft and hundreds of flight requests and 5,400 airports, you have quintillions of potential routing solutions. And trying to figure out what is the best route requires supercomputer, massively parallel multi-computer capabilities. So if you Google VeriJet and IBM, you'll see that VeriJet is on IBM's homepage, talking about what we do today with IBM's data centers and what we do tomorrow with quantum computing. Quantum is the first possibility, first glimpse we have of what might be a solution to the traveling salesman problem. Instead of trying to get the best top 10% maybe, we could potentially compute all the possible paths at once, come up with exactly the best, save even more carbon, make the fleet more available. There are 3 problem areas that IBM has selected to showcase quantum. One is protein folding, that's for medicine discovery, COVID medicines, conceivably curing cancer. One is catalyst discovery, that's for clean energy and unlimited energy and better chemical processes. And the third is my problem, the traveling salesman problem, using VeriJet data and IBM's quantum physicists, and off we go to try and tackle them.
So I had the great pleasure with one of my daughter to have a flight with you on the Cyrus Vision Jet. It was a phenomenal plane. Why did you select that plane to build on VeriJet, and why would that not have been possible 10 years ago?
So I've been waiting 15 years for this plane. And even when it came out, I waited for its second generation. It's carbon fiber, so there's no metal fatigue. Every time you pressurize an aircraft, you lose some of the life of that aircraft. And if you were to look up the Hawaiian Air accident where the fuselage rips open and a flight attendant's pulled out to space, or if we talked about the history of the de Havilland Comet, most people have never heard of the comet, and that's because after about 3 months, it would blow apart in the air. And the reason was it had square windows, and the stress would concentrate in the corners. Boeing Lockheed, they had rounded windows, and that's why we have a US commercial aviation industry as opposed to the British. The Comet was beautiful. It was like an Art Deco plane from the future, but it had square windows. That's the importance of metal fatigue. We don't have that. And we also have one engine, and that engine is adapted from a cruise missile designed to go low and slow. So our machine is designed for short hops, radically efficient, radically quiet, radically safe. It's 50 decibels quieter than the stage 4 noise requirements, so it can operate at the most noise sensitive airports. It can land itself. It has an AI on board to help the pilot avoid problems. And in the worst case, the plane has a ballistic parachute that lowers the whole airplane to the ground. And it's been used to save hundreds of lives already. It's a system that absolutely works. This layered approach to safety has resulted in not one, but 2 Collier trophies for the Vision Jet. The Collier Trophy acknowledges the biggest advance of aviation in a year. You have to build a secret military space plane or a 787 or a space shuttle to win that kind of trophy. This plane is the only craft that I know of that has 2. One for its efficiency and design, and one for its safety and parachute and the ability to auto land itself. So it's game changing in safety. It's game changing in efficiency. We are one pilot. The second pilot is an AI. We're one engine, and we're carbon fiber. Everything else is 2 and metal. We have unbeatable margins. We're democratizing private charter, and our AI gives us about 30% more efficiency, and the jet another 40%. Taken together, this is the first thing that can credibly take people out of first class. So my competitors are not ExoJet or JetWings. They're wonderful favored nation trading partners. My competitors, my target is United or Delta. They charge you more per seat mile for the inconvenience of making you wait at Hartsfield or O'Hare. It's just inverted pricing. By the time I'm done, and this isn't a 5 to 10 year window, but by the time I'm done, the definition of insanity will be taking an airliner where you have to connect at an airport for a trip less than 800 miles. It's just be better, cheaper, faster on us.
So that's a dream, especially for people like us who are traveling all the time and people in the meetings and event industry. But how could that be cost effective? Obviously, when you compare with what people, let's say somebody's bringing, not even a board meeting, because I would assume that people can fly in first. But even with that, how could that be cost efficient? And why is it the future of air travel?
So you won't believe me, but I'm going to give you the direct answer. So first of all, one engine, one pilot. So we've dropped costs with our jets. Our jet goes Mach 0.52, burning 56 gallons an hour at altitude. So we've dropped the cost of private charter. We're about a third. Our second fleet type is a piston engine airplane built by Cirrus, also has a parachute. Instead of about 3,000 an hour, it would retail at about 1,000 an hour. So we're down another third. Our third fleet type that I'm not ready to name yet cost about $45 to fill up because it's all electric. It has no carbon footprint. It takes off vertically and flies horizontally. It's maybe 1,000 times safer than a helicopter, much quieter than a helicopter, and none of it is science fiction. The machine is already flying. I've flown the simulators for it. This transitions from an airplane to a glider to from a helicopter to a glider to an airplane and back again. And when you have different emergencies unfold, you have multiple options on how to deal with the emergency. We'll double down on safety. We already fly the safest, most efficient machine ever built for jets, but it's going to double down on that again. But now we're going to drop the price point to 200 an hour. And now it looks like commercial coach last minute. And it gets you there directly. And no hour before flight, no connecting, no sharing passengers. My last two commercial flights were horrible. Both times there were altercations on the airplane. People are just, the masks, the shoving more people on fewer flights, it's horrible. The commercial experience is horrible. Let me double down on that. I flew all through the pandemic on my Vision jets. That's how we funded our company. It was me showing up with a jet and flying people, because I can show you videos all day and we have great ones, and reach out to us and I'll share them with you. But until you actually experience this machine and how smooth and quiet and safe it is, and visibility is incredible, until you experience it, it doesn't work. You don't believe it. So I had to bring my machine in for some maintenance, and I took one flight on United Airlines. First class, first row, bulkhead, wearing PPE gear. 4 days later, my wife and I had COVID. I reached out to the airline, and I don't mind throwing United under the bus. I reached out to them and I said, look, my tray table was dirty. You showed me this video about how you sterilize the plane. You don't have enough time in a 1 hour turn to clean an airliner. You need to look at your crews. In this case, it was Centennial in Denver. You need to look at the time you're turning over the planes, and you need to do some contact tracing here. 14 days later, they respond. So I looked into it. That December, they had a passenger die of respiratory failure due to COVID, and they didn't warn the people on their flight. I'm like, I give up. So I spoke with the Prince's Trust. That's Princess Charles's Trust for At-Risk Youth in Europe. And my topic was COVID-safe transportation. Mm-hmm. And this is, of course, foreshadowing. We're launching Europe sooner rather than later. And someone asked me, I've just gotten one shot. Am I safe to fly commercial? I'm like, you don't understand. It was never safe to fly commercial. I have a friend who's an opera singer. She was Christine in Phantom of the Opera. She keeps a Challenger because when she flies to her commercial dates, she misses a week of concert time because she gets sick from the airliner. I used to fly for Ross Perot all the time, same thing. So you're in a small tube for hours and hours. Your sinuses dry up, and it was never safe to begin with. Our experience is completely different. We UV sterilize the plane between hops. In flight, we have a medical grade, FDA approved device that scrubs the air, both UV and microparticle, and it's about as safe as it can get in terms of catching something in a flight. The New York Times said there's 700 points of infection when you fly on an airliner. Private gets you down to 20 or 30. We're trying for near zero.
Wow. That's phenomenal. Now I'm listening to you, and I feel like you talk about quantum computer. I was just watching all the James Bond with one of my daughters, so I'm thinking quantum of Solas. I'm thinking the plane. You say electric plane. It's taking up vertically. When is this happening? Are we looking at 5 years down the road, or are we looking at 30 years down the road?
So what people don't understand, and even my companies today, VeriJet is built on a machine that's the convergence of material science, of AI, of metallurgy. This plane couldn't have been built 10 years ago. And it gets better with software updates. It's more like a Tesla than a standard airplane. I mean, they can change its performance profile by giving me a software patch. It's incredible. So then you're dispatching it by AI, which is another advance. And then the AI platforms going into quantum, an advance again. To answer your question directly, we'll be flying electric aircraft around at least Florida and California by 2024. And that's
in 3 years.
That's not throwing darts on a board. That's a conservative delivery schedule. Wow. The machine that we plan to fly is already flying, is already accepted by the Air Force, actually, and is not the kind of hype that you're seeing. We're just quietly building and executing in the background. And it's going to take a lot of people by surprise. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Wow. So you told me about the safe return. So The one pilot, God forbid, something happened, I can just push the red button on the roof, and the plane is landing itself automatically. When are we going to see planes that actually operated automatically, that are taking off and landing on their own?
So we have that now. There are drones that are full-size drones that land on aircraft carriers. So that's considered to be the most challenging landing there is. If you Google EHang, E-H-A-N-G, you'll find quadcopters flying people around China that there's some screaming. There's one video that's hilarious. Again, ping me and I'll share it. But it's fully autonomous. It's taking off. It's doing a tour around some buildings and landing again. So that's sooner rather than later. In the US, we'll fly hundreds of millions of packages for companies like FedEx or Amazon. And if we don't drop any of the packages, then we'll apply for people. That's kind of the battle plan. But what's not commonly known in the US, for example, a railway pioneered the use of drones, not line of sight where you're sitting there controlling it, but fully autonomously. Let's send it down 100 miles of railroad track and find a potential derailment. And in fact, they did, and it worked. So we already have autonomous vehicles flying around the US under computer control, doing incredible things. Let me give you another example. If you have a tower for cell phones, it has to be inspected twice a year. Someone climbs the tower, it costs thousands of dollars, and it costs lives. Every year people fall off. You take a drone, it flies a computer pattern around the tower, very complex, takes better imaging, and the cost is $100 and no loss of life. So it's being applied already, just people don't realize how prevalent it is. If I may tell one more story.
Oh, please.
So,
only one? I hope more.
Oh, no, there's many. If I were to say Rwanda to you, you might think genocide and machetes, sadly. And if I tell you that Rwanda is going to have 200,000 drone flights this year, you pull up your phone, you pull up your app, you ask for blood or medical supplies, and 20 minutes later, a drone flies overhead and delivers them. And the reason it's Rwanda, not the US, is that the roads are pitted and muddy and unpaved. And it's like a 6-hour drive on a military-grade 4-wheel drive truck to get you the blood supply that you need, or it's 20 minutes by drone. It's nothing complicated. They're flying the drone, launching it like this. It lands in a net. It drops the supplies, right? Well, fast forward a little bit. Africa bypassed copper wires and landlines and went right to 5G. And they have the highest adoption rates of cell phones in the world. Peter likes to say that a Maasai warrior has better access to data sitting in a field than Ronald Reagan did as president of the US. And it's absolutely true. Just Google it right on your phone, right?
Yeah.
So why pave over Africa? Why destroy the environment, the thing that drives their ecotourism? Why not just fly people in VTOLs?
Yeah.
Concrete is one of the highest carbon spewing industrial processes we have. Don't do it. And don't spend $500 billion paving everything.
Yeah.
Just go with VTOLs, and it's cheaper, better, faster. So that's one of our goals. When I told this to the Prince's Trust, I didn't know if I was going to get laughed at or not. And they went, wow, how can we help you? So the world's about to change, more like the Jetsons, less like the traffic jam outside of LA.
That's exciting. And about telling stories, I have a quick one that you remind me of when we were talking about the Maasai. I was once organizing an incentive in Tanzania, and we were at Maasai village, Olduvai, overlooking the Serengeti. And one of the Maasai looked at me and he said, Eric, do you know the difference between the Swiss and the Maasai? I said, no. He said, the Swiss have the watches. We have the time.
There you go. That's a great answer.
Never forget that story. And on the side story about Rwanda, yes, I know people that are working there in the meetings and event industry, and it is probably the most advanced, most secure, and most elaborate country now when it comes to a convention and conference center. It's amazing what President Kagame has done, bringing the Hutu and the Tutsi together. It's absolutely fascinating. Now, back to what you're doing with this technology. I know you've been involved with the X Prize. So for those who don't know about the X Prize, can you explain what you, Peter Diamandis, have done and one of the application that you're working on right now?
So few people realize that major advances have come from prizes. and the magic of using a prize to move technology. So the longitude prize gave us navigation. The X prize opened up commercial access to space. So the origin story of all this is Peter was having trouble finishing his pilot's license. And our friend Greg Marionette gave him the book, The Spirit of St. Louis. And it's an amazing book. I highly recommend it. It's more spiritual than technical, if you believe that. But it's about Charles Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic. And Peter gets about halfway through and realizes, wait a second, Charles crossed the Atlantic to win the $25,000 Ortigue Prize. Raymond Ortigue had a hotel in Paris, a hotel in New York. He wanted people to fly back and forth nonstop. He left the rules of that prize to the Aero Club of New York. All other details left to the Aero Club. Could be either direction. Something like 8 teams spent $400,000. So you got an 8x return on your investment, and you didn't write the check until you had a proven technology, or maybe a 40x return on your investment. So Peter wanted to commercialize space. Hey, let's put out a $10 million X prize for suborbital spaceflight. Paul Allen financed a team that ultimately spent $22 million to win that $10 million prize. But many other teams had super creative ideas on how to open up space. Virgin Galactic this Sunday will be flying on Spaceship Two, essentially the successor to the X Prize Spaceship One. But I was there with my daughter in the desert launching spaceships with Richard Branson and Paul Allen and Peter Diamandis and the X Prize team. And it was amazing to be there. More amazing, Peter and I visited the Air and Space Museum, and there's a spaceship. I didn't build it, I didn't design it. I was part of maybe the prize committee, a small part that made it happen. But there it is in the Milestones of Flight gallery, next to the Spirit of St. Louis, the Bell X-1, the first plane to break the sound barrier, the X-15, first plane to go Mach 2, and an Apollo capsule. When you help create a spaceship that lands in the Milestones of Flight gallery, you feel like you could create an airline. And I watched the X Prize team envision it, create it, make it happen. The tagline being the easiest way to predict the future is to create it. I've learned some of those lessons. That's what I try to do. So that's kind of how some of this comes about. It's a deeply tech forward, figure out where the curves are going to change and build companies. So this isn't my first rodeo. I was routing these phone calls at 100 million phone calls an hour, and I looked at the cost, and I created a project that was 30% over cost. That's pretty high risk, narrow margin. And I was betting on the number of calls going up. I figured more people are going to buy cell phones, more calls, and the cost of computing and storage going down. It was the divergence of those two curves that gave me 68% EBITDA. It's not that I'm this great CEO, far from it, but I could read the tea leaves of where tech was going and position a company to ride those waves. So same thing here. Yeah.
I like the humility you have, because it's so much admiration for you and for the intellect, and for you actually not only thinking but putting into practice, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, you start our conversation. You said if we have time, I'll speak about the two main things that really happened. Do you remember what it was?
I do, but this is terrible. All right, here we go. One is really sad. So Timothy McVeigh blows up the federal building, and he's carrying a prepaid calling card. And the Michigan militia thought because they were prepaid, there'd be no phone bills and no way to trace them. I had authored software for my customer, West Coast Telecom, that could trace calls. And this was for problem reporting. And I was running fraud detection. And we get a call from the Secret Service. Hey, we arrested this guy. We think he's part of this network that just blew up the federal building. 12 hours later, they had rolled up the Michigan militia because they knew who they were, had their calling data. That's how they found the farmhouse with the blue barrels of explosive, with explosive residue. I saw what you could do with data to shut down a domestic terrorist organization. It's very big brother. It's a little scary, but at the same time, I think there was more lives saved.
Yep.
And it happened very quickly. Tied to that, the first time that I ran my fraud detection system, not production, the first test run was during Tiananmen Square. And we found that someone had shoulder surfed, that's looking over the shoulder of someone dialing a code, a calling card code into a payphone. So for your younger viewers, there were these things that were on a wall with these keypads, and you dial like a 10-digit number to make these calls, and it would cost $1.50 a minute. And a decade of my prior career was getting that $1.50 down to a fraction of a penny a minute. And we did. And I can talk about that all day. But anyway, there were like 1,200 calls on this one broken calling card. And when you make a call to China, you're paying Chinatel $1.40 a minute, whether or not it's fraudulent or not, you signed up. It was life and death for that company. So the first test we did saved this company from bankruptcy because they had 1,100 calls in progress to China. That wasn't the second story. The second story, the team at WorldCom had the prison contracts in Florida and Texas. It was just horrible. And some of the people involved went to jail, not over this, but for some other things. And very briefly, they would overcharge prisoners, their families, to make these collect calls at the $1.50 a minute, the people who could least afford to carry that burden. But to collect, they had to have billing and collection agreements in different areas of the country. And the prisoners figured out that certain counties had no billing and collection agreement. So they'd make the collect call, and then that prisoner's family would three-way call all the other prisoners, and you'd be on for hours and hours and hours and cheating WorldCom out of the dollars for these prison contracts. And part of my job was to actually send checks to the prisons for a kickback for overcharging the prisoners' families. So it was just a bad piece of business. I didn't like it. Did it, but didn't like it. But anyway, I was ordered to shut down calling to those areas where there are no billing and collection agreements. This was like a Saturday at 10 a.m. By 4 p.m., I was ordered to reverse it because we caused prison riots in two prisons simultaneously when the prisoners found they couldn't call their families anymore and didn't do the three-way calling. If you're in jail for other things, calling fraud doesn't actually really, it's not too daunting a deterrent. So those were the only interesting things that happened in more than a decade of routing telephone calls. Routing airplanes and using them more efficiently and tackling that 40% empty stigma that goes with private jets, that was a lot more interesting, and I've done that successfully. That AI saves 200,000 pounds of carbon a week and has dramatic—
How much? 200,000 pounds of
carbon footprint every week.
Every week?
Every week, yep. By more efficient routing of fleets of aircraft. And that fixed the empty problem, and that fixed the use of the fleet problem, but it didn't fix the wrong tool for the job problem. That's what VeriJet is. Carbon fiber, light airplane, one engine, up to 6 passengers on short hops. We're burning between a third and a ninth of the carbon, making very little noise. And it's the safest experience possible.
I can't wait to fly that plane in a few years. I can wait that.
I know it's on your vision board. It's going to make it happen.
Because of you. Yes, sir. With great pleasure. Now, one thing, and practically speaking, for people in the meetings and even industry. So you're having a meeting, let's say in Fort Worth, and you have people coming from Boca Raton, people coming from New Jersey, people coming from I don't know, let's say Anaheim in California.
Yes.
Can you explain what's going to happen in the future? Why is it more cost efficient? Why is it more environmentally friendly? And also maybe start by explaining the difference between the number of hub, I think it's like 29, 30 big airport hub in the US versus 5,400 landing strip. Is that correct?
It is. So working backwards, the general public has no idea there's 5,400 airports. I've had major investment firms not realize that there was a close small airport 5 minutes from their office instead of a 30-minute drive to Bedford. And they don't know it because those runways are shorter and most jets can't use those runways. Our jets, because they land so slowly and so safely, can use all of these short runways. So it opens up this infrastructure of 5,400 airports. 98% of us are 20 miles from one or more of these airports. And you can just drive there, board our airplane and go. There's no hour before the flight. There's no driving to the big airport. and we take you to the airport closest to your destination.
Hold on. Sorry for interrupting you, Richard, because you just say something that struck my mind. 98% of us are living 20 minutes from one of those 5,400 airports?
20 miles.
20 miles. Wow.
If you go to VeriJet.com and you put in your zip code, you'll see the airports pop up around you, many of which you'll never know that existed until you see that. And people are startled. Hey, we can fly right to Tyler, Texas, instead of DFW and renting a car or whatever it is. Actually, Tyler has an airport. Allow me to tell a story that'll nail a bunch of these things, and then I'll return to your question.
Okay.
So there's a gentleman that owns MSA Roofing. His name's Robert. I probably shouldn't identify him. He's not a big fan of airplanes. He sends half his team on United, half on Delta, so they don't all die in the same plane crash. And he is in Tuscaloosa, and Tuscaloosa lost their commercial air service. They lost their air service subsidies. They have an abandoned airline terminal. And he was driving to Birmingham and couching Southwest, and you could still kind of reasonably get direct service until COVID. And then COVID pared down the Southwest schedule. So this is a direct quote. It's a day and a half for him to get to a meeting and a day and a half to get back, 3 days out and back because he's in this desert for commercial service. Or it's 3 meetings in one day on VeriJet and he's back home to his family at night. But that's not why he invested in the company. He invested in the company because he and his wife met my wife and I on an early Sunday morning at Tuscaloosa. And candidly, I don't think she wanted to get in the jet. It looks like a small airplane, right? And when I have someone who's afraid of flying, I give them the air disaster tour of aviation. I line up on the wrong runway and I show them how the plane identifies that. Or I approach a runway where someone's landing and I show them how the airplane identifies that. So the greatest loss of life in aviation was when 1747 hit another at Tenerife. The plane taxied out to an active runway in the fog. Or the Colgan Air incident where they lined up on a runway that was 30 degrees off the proper one and it was too short. Or Payne Stewart's accident where the plane depressurized. If that happens in a Vision jet and I don't respond right away, the plane lowers itself to a breathable altitude. And if I still don't wake up, it lands itself. So, and I just go down this list of all these disasters and loss of life accidents that wouldn't have occurred in a Vision jet. To make it more recent, Kobe, Miley Cyrus and her manager said, I wish all my friends would be on VeriJet. I don't want to lose any more of my friends. That was 2 days after that accident. We showed her the safe return video where the plane lands itself. It can see mountains. It's got all this capability. So he actually invested in VeriJet when his wife said, can you send 2 jets because our family won't fit on one airplane? And then 15 minutes later, she said, you've got to fly all our personnel on VeriJet because we want them to be safe. And of course, it's super time efficient. But they didn't invest for the efficiency. They invested because of the safety. And this is just this triple whammy of it's safer, it's more time efficient, and it's an amazing experience. It actually makes flying back into something joyous instead of...
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yep, I concur with that. Yeah, and a big smile.
So we're booking air travel by street address to discover the close airports to the origin and destination. But now let's imagine you're a big company and you want to have a board meeting. You can send the Gulfstream around like a party bus, or you can send 5 small airplanes and converge on a central location and fly them back again. So it's basically a one-day board meeting. And I've done this twice now with our own company. We have a beautiful boardroom at Opelika, where one of our offices are. I'm exploring Horseshoe Bay, Texas to do this. But basically, you bring your delegates, your board members in, you have your meeting and fly them back. So people will say, but wait a second, you're burning carbon. Well, this is not green, right? Well, first of all, our plane is the best steward of existing jet fuel right now, but it can burn 4 types of biofuel, what we call sustainable aviation fuel, and we could drive it to carbon zero.
Wow.
So getting back to X Prize, there's a $140 million carbon sequestration X Prize announced by Elon Musk and Peter Diamandis just about 4 weeks ago out of NASA. By the way, Peter then tweeted, he flew VeriJet home from NASA to Boca Raton. And so that was really cool. The first prize is $30 million. The people driving this prize are all pilots. You know that jet fuel is going to come out of the carbon sequestration X Prize. And so we will run our planes carbon zero. It extends the life of our airplanes while we go to batteries.
Everything you're saying, Richard, it sounds like it's a science fiction movie and it's happening right now, right?
It is. And by the time you look at what quantum actually is and what it does and the mechanics of it, it is science fiction. All of a sudden, faster than light communications are there and proven and they work. And quantum sounds like something that's theoretical. It's the basis of all of our computer chips right now, the electron shells, all the electronics we use every day. So it clearly works.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah,
I can listen to you for hours, and I'm sure people listening today as well. I know you're an extremely busy man, and I so much appreciate you taking the time. It's now we're recording on the 8th of July, as you mentioned. Richard Branson is going into space on Sunday because he wanted to beat Jeff Bezos. I believe those people, the kids competing. It's just fascinating what they're doing. In 1 year, what do you think is going to be the reality of air travel?
So, first of all, this is for the first time publicly, I'm announcing that July 23rd, VeriJet will be in California. I'll be at Hawthorne. It's in the shadow of SpaceX, Tesla, the Boring Company, launching VeriJet service. And on July 26th forward,
wow,
you can
congratulations,
California. So I brought 26 eco-minded people to Santa Monica Airport, pop stars and their managers, sports stars and their managers. Ethan Brown's company sent a vegan burger truck. So Ethan Brown's company, Beyond Meat. And I told them basically everything that I've told you today. Carbon fiber, one engine, one pilot, less carbon, less noise. What I haven't mentioned here is that when you're traveling short distances, there's no time to climb higher. So the big thirsty engines on the fast jets that are optimized to go high and fast are environmental disasters for short haul. And half the Earth's atmosphere is below 18,000 feet. So the air is denser, there's speed limits, you can't go as fast. So the average speed is 247 knots. You could have the world's fastest civilian plane, like the Citation 10, it's nearly supersonic. It's still 247 knots down low. So I tell everyone this, we do a whole presentation, and along comes a Challenger, and it's owned by a bank, and one person gets on it, and he goes to Las Vegas. That's 200 nautical, 230 statute miles. Flight planned at 19,000 feet at 280 miles an hour, which was my 247 knots. Every reason they're trying to close Santa Monica Airport, and they had already chopped the runway down to 3,500 feet, I was able to tell them that that plane is not a charter airplane, that's privately owned. It's too big an airplane and too small a runway, and it couldn't be 135. It's not legal to do that. So we knew it was privately owned. Every reason they wanted to close that airport, the noise, this thing was ear splitting, the carbon, it was 9 times the carbon footprint, the danger, this is too big an airplane in that facility, materialized like I had staged it. And they wanted to go carbon shame this bank. And I told them, please don't do that. Let's just give them a better alternative. That's VeriJet. So you take our plane, it's crazy quiet, it's crazy safe. You run it on biofuel, there's nothing left to complain about. Planes don't crash in the backyard. Maybe they float down under a parachute once in a while. If you don't believe me, you can find videos of a dad and a daughter floating down in front of a warehouse on Long Island, or the former CEO of Walmart pulling the chute, or a few weeks ago after a mid-air collision in Colorado and everyone walked away. So that those systems work. It all goes away, the noise, the carbon, the footprint. Now do it electric and make it $200 an hour and it's game over. So that's what the future of transport looks like. Inside of 4 years, 6 at the latest, you're not going to get in a car and go Palm Beach to Miami and sit in traffic, or try and get from Brickell to the airport at Opelika. You're going to have us pick you up in a VTOL, something that looks like a VeriJet vertiport. It's going to be a little passenger terminal. You hop on your electric plane. You don't have to worry about carbon or global warming because it's carbon zero, and game over for short haul on airlines. And maybe for commuting. I don't know the price point at where you're not going to sit in a car in a traffic jam anymore, but for a lot of people, it's probably $40 to $60.
Wow.
I envision by the time the Olympics are in California, he'll be taking VeriJet vertiport type craft to the Olympics, and we're going to try and be at all those venues. There's a lot that's going to change in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm positioning VeriJet to be a big part of that.
Richard, thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for taking the time. It's fascinating. One last most important question. When we are together flying from Palm Beach to Miami, is it okay to serve champagne on board?
It is. We had to do that for the Super Bowl. Our pilots don't like some of those requests, but great baskets. No, we definitely do champagne. We have amazing influencers where you'll see videos popping up now as we take them to the islands, and we're having a great time. It is a lot of fun to run an airline. It's not just math. It's actually really cool. You get to do great things and meet amazing people. I really value our friendship, and I'm glad we got the chance to talk about this stuff today. And I can't wait to go flying again.
Me too. Thank you so much, Richard.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye. Richard, thank you so much for taking the time speaking with me. It's absolutely fascinating what you're doing. You're truly revolutionizing travel. I love flying with you, and I hope I will be able to do that on a very regular basis. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to connect with me, please go on LinkedIn or join the Facebook group on www.eventbusinessformula.com/group, where we discuss everything related to owning your business in the meetings and event industry.